Introduction to Heart Cultivation and Mind Refining. I am Wu Zhengyi, and I am exploring this world of cultivation. Oh, look! It's a wild cultivator. Be careful. Although wild cultivators may appear harmless and amiable on the surface, in reality, they have eaten countless cultivators behind their backs. But fortunately, we have Ling Jian Ming brand protective necklaces. With it, we can protect ourselves from the persecution of these wild cultivators in the cultivation world. Now pick up your communicator and dial the number to order. Will this thing really be useful? Chapter 1. Sunrise. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, hee. The young man gently wiped the sweat off his forehead with his arm and put down the plow in his hand. Turning to the old man sitting under the nearby tree, he shouted, "Second uncle. I've finished helping you." The old man was holding a dry cigarette in his mouth, his eyelids drooping one after another. I was startled to wake up when I heard the boys shout. I raised my hand to block the slowly rising sun and watched the proud boy in the field cross-legged, showing off his great achievements to him. It was like a field that had been bitten by a huge mouse. The old man shook his head in silence and slowly stood up with his hands on the ground. Stinky kid. I've taught you a few times, but you can still ruin it for me like this. I owe you something to clean up, right? The young man looked at the old man who was rolling up his sleeves and about to use the branches that had fallen from the nearby tree to pull people. He quickly turned around and ran to the plow lying on the ground to sleep, helping it up. He said to the old man, "Isn't this waiting for you to point me wrong? I've only been working in the field for a few days now. How can I compare to your sharp technique? Stinky kid, teaching you to study in school is like learning these nonsense, isn't it?" The old man didn't spare anyone, but he had already thrown the branches in his hand where he didn't know. The young man breathed a sigh of relief as he saw the old man throw away the branch. Unexpectedly, the old man walked over and suddenly kicked his butt. Wow! The boy was kicked away and plunged into the mud. The old man thought to himself that he had gone too far when he saw the young man's miserable situation. He was about to step forward and help him, but the young man rolled up with a growl. The old man saw that the young man had nothing to do and retreated to the side of the plow, pretending to be indifferent. What an iron old man! The boy rubbed his buttocks and muttered, then slowly got up and walked to the old man's side. The old man lightly tapped his brain again, signaling the young man to take it seriously. The young man's mind quickly drew from the bird on the tree in the distance to the plow in front of him. Looking at the masterpiece that I had run to play with in order to finish work earlier, I blushed and felt embarrassed to continue making jokes. I followed the old man seriously and learned how to plow the fields. The air exposed to strong sunlight appears with faint ripples like water. The young man sat on the tree, overlooking the fields where he and the old man had been working hard all morning. Looking back on his lazy demeanor and comparing it with the present. The young man was too embarrassed to go see the old man under the tree enjoying the cool breeze. The old man looked at the endless fields and took a puff of dry smoke. "Let's go, you did a good job today." The boy saw the old man forgive him and happily jumped down the tree to follow the old man towards the village. "Mr. Wang. Old Wang has returned. Did this kid plow the land to pieces again this time? Ha ha ha." The old man took a puff of dry smoke and waved his hand. "No. You did a great job this time, you have 1/10 of my charm." The old man pretended to be indifferent on the surface, but in reality, he was extremely happy in his heart. Since his younger brother left, this kid hasn't paid much attention to anything and has been following the group of people in the village all day. He's so angry that he takes care of him every now and then. The old man turned his head to look at the disobedient boy, as if he had seen his powerful younger brother. There was a glimmer of light on the rough and dark cheeks of the old man, but soon he pinched the boy's ear and told everyone about his morning actions. The boy covered his ears and grinned, glaring angrily at the old man. The old man didn't get used to him either, he just knocked the dry tobacco with his back hand. The boy grinned again. "Brother. You're back." A simple-dressed little girl ran out of the yellow courtyard in front of the two of them, her eyes shining brightly as she looked at the two of them at a loss. "Did you bring me sugar back?" The two of you were taken aback. "Look at me, look at you, and forget about this matter." The old man gave the young man a glance without leaving any trace, and the young man instantly understood. "We definitely brought it for you. How could you forget about it?" The boy pretended to lower his head and touch his pocket everywhere, but in reality, his eyes secretly watched the old man blinking non-stop. After all, the old man is an old man. Watching the crazily signaled young man give him a brain teaser. A thud echoed among the three people, and the young man covered his head and looked at the old man incredulously. The old man's dark face showed no expression. "Take a look, it's all your brother who wants to play at the village entrance and ruin things. So, can I have him go to your Aunt Zhang's place and bring 2 pieces of yellow sugar to you now?" The little girl looked at the smiling old man, then at the angry young man and understood something, and then Noah spoke up, "Grandpa, then let my brother go to Aunt Zhang's place and bring back 2 pieces of brown sugar." Then he took the old man's hand and walked into the yard, leaving the young man incredulously stunned at the door. The young man hid under the bamboo hat to avoid the scorching sun's licking, smelling the fragrance from every household around him, and couldn't help but feel angry when he remembered those ugly-faced gentlemen. Kicking away a stone with one foot, the rhubarb lies in the middle, gnawing on bones on the ground. So while everyone in the village was eating, they could also see the young man being chased and crying by the dog. Arriving at the shop at the village head, it is the only shop in the village. The young man ran into the courtyard and quickly closed the door to block the disturbed rhubarb from eating. The woman in the brick house heard the sound and smiled as she looked at the embarrassed boy covering her face. "Xiao Wu, why are you being chased by rhubarb again?" The young man sat on the stone bench in the yard, dejected and disheartened. "Ah, it's a long story for a child without a mother. Let's not talk about past achievements. We need to move forward. By the way, Aunt Zhang, my grandfather asked me to come and get 2 pieces of brown sugar." The woman looked at the disheveled boy and smiled, "Then you're still competing with rhubarb for food. Isn't someone cooking something delicious for you?" The young man was about to refute when the rhubarb outside the courtyard shouted. The young man was so frightened that he crawled and hid behind the woman before realizing that the rhubarb had not entered. "It seems that this rhubarb won't leave for a while and a half. You didn't have lunch, did you? Coincidentally, I made too much and you came to have some." The boy followed the woman into the room and just wanted to drink water and left, but he saw braised pork belly on the table. After wiping his saliva, he was about to refuse Aunt Zhang with strict words, but the food was already served, so he shamelessly went to the kitchen to wash his hands and come over to eat together. The young man didn't dare to indulge too much at first. After taking a few pieces of meat and taking a small bite to eat, he found that Aunt Zhang didn't mind. He immediately regained his true nature and began to wolf down. "Eat slowly, there's still something in the pot." The boy was embarrassed when he heard Aunt Zhang's gentle concern, and went to Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com, chewing braised pork belly and rice, muttering. "That old man just gives me a whole bowl of dried lo mein every day. He doesn't even have the leaves to order vegetables. He can't wipe the bowl for me with pig skin and taste some oil stars. Aunt Zhang is good to me." The woman touched the boy's head and said, "It's okay. Next time you want to eat meat, come find Aunt Zhang. Aunt has fed you so much." The boy nodded repeatedly, then continued to pick and pull the rice and braised pork belly in the bowl. "Xiao Wu. Be careful on the way." "Got it, Aunt Zhang." The young man waved his hand towards the back and walked towards the direction of home before arriving at the yellow courtyard. The young man was about to smash the door into the room when he saw the old man walking out and silencing him. Looking sideways, it turned out that the little girl was already asleep lying on the Kong. "You didn't eat or take anything from Aunt Zhang's place, did you?" The old man looked at the young man with suspicion. "Pull it down. Am I that kind of person?" The boy took out a cloth bag from his pocket and spread it out. Inside were 2 large pieces of brown sugar. The old man knocked on the boy and said, "How could you get such a big piece of candy? Do you know how much this candy costs?" The young man rubbed his head with both hands and looked at the old man with grievances. "Aunt Zhang said she wanted something for my sister to eat, but I didn't ask for more." "You kid." The old man just raised his hand as he was about to hit, and sighed as he watched the young man who didn't run away but stood still waiting to be beaten. "Well, when the corn is planted, go pick some good ones and send them over more." The young man escaped the disaster, took the sugar to a small jar in the kitchen, packed it with a lid, and then ran to the Kong to lie down and sleep. The old man sat on the threshold of the door smoking a dry cigarette, leaning against the door frame. Watching the 2 people sleeping on the Kong, they smiled with relief. Chapter 2. Seeing Blood. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, 5 years have passed in a blink of an eye, and the former youth has now grown up. The young man walked along the field path with a hoe, greeting the surrounding farmers who were still working. "Hey, Uncle Lee is still busy." "Me. Oh me, don't you know? We've already finished it." "What? We've hoed the ground like before again." "How could that be?" The boy patted his solid wheat-colored chest. "You just look at our physique." He raised his free arm and gestured, "Look at these muscles. Where can the work be worse?" The young man walked over with a smile and shouted a few words as he passed by. Everyone was happy now, and the pain from working all day seemed to have decreased a bit. The boy hummed a tune and strode into the yard with a meteor. I happened to see the old man come out with a black face and say, "That's it, this old man has a black face again." No, I didn't do anything bad. I've also done the farm work seriously. I'm afraid I'll beg him for something. So confidently, he continued to hold his head high and walk towards the old man with a black face. "Are you causing trouble at school again?" Then Mr. Lee just came to see me again. Alright, I didn't quite understand what he said, so I left after leaving a notebook. "Did you not do your homework again? Did you make someone come home this time to embarrass yourself?" The boy heard this and quickly threw down his hoe and went into the house to look through the notebook. Looking at the comments in a big good character written above, I looked at the old man speechlessly. The old man saw that something was wrong with the boy and temporarily stopped the stick in his hand. Taking the notebook handed over by the young man, apart from the slightly crooked characters written by the young man, there was only a short comment and a big good character. Although the old man doesn't recognize a few big characters, he can still recognize a good character. I just threw away the hoe in my hand and let the young man let go of his heart. "What are you, Mr. Lee, doing here? He specifically came over to praise you." The old man looked at the young man with his chin almost touching the roof and raised his hand, ready to hit. The young man quickly restrained his expression and said, "Isn't it true that my handwriting is good and my writing is also good?" "Sir, he didn't come all the way to praise me." The old man clenched his fist and restrained the young man who was showing off in front of him. After casually sarcastic remarks, he turned his head and walked into the kitchen to prepare for cooking, saying, "Go pick up your sister. She and a group of little kids went to play around in the Gobi Desert." The young man heard these words and quickly ran out. That was not a place where children could run and play. He accidentally ran away and got lost. On second thought, the old man was not in a hurry at all. He probably followed an adult. Just as he was about to slow down, he was shouted at and hurried away. Not long after, we arrived at the edge of the Gobi Desert. Looking at the vast sea of sand ahead, the boy quickly ran towards the small hill in the distance. "Brother Wang, is it really okay for us to run so far?" A few children followed a slightly well-dressed young man in front of them. The young man held a piece of cowhide in his hand and pointed to it, saying, "Do you think this place looks like these big stones in front of you?" "Like." The young man put away the cowhide and proudly held his head high, saying, "This is the treasure map I secretly brought from my father. There must be treasure there." A few children were cheering and jumping, but only one little girl hesitated a bit. "Wu Xianer, don't worry. With me around, we can definitely protect everyone." The little girl looked at the confident young man and had no choice but to follow him to the place where the treasure was located. In no time, a few children ran up to these stones. Looking at the strange-shaped stones surrounding us, everyone was convinced that there would be a treasure here. The boy took out the treasure map and compared it up and down to confirm that it was here. A group of children cheered and walked in to start digging for treasures. Little did they know that danger was gradually approaching, alas. "Brother Wang, we have dug all over here, and there is no treasure." Several children leaned against the stones and roasted about the teenagers who commanded them to work. The young man felt a bit embarrassed and took out a cowhide to look at it. After thinking for a moment, he said, "We haven't found it on the stone yet. Let's go up and take a look." A few children got up again, ready to climb up the stone. The boy turned to look at the little girl and said, "Wu Xianer, won't you come up with us?" The little girl shook her head and turned to sit under the stone. The boy touched his nose and climbed up the stone with a few children. A few children climbed up and found nothing on it. Even after searching, they couldn't find any place to hide anything. When the boy was bored, he suggested playing war games again, so a few children started playing on it again. Ding! The little girl seemed to feel something and stood up to look towards the exit. After a gust of wind swept up the sand, a figure slowly walked over. The little girl looked at the figure on guard, but as he got closer and closer, the figure gradually overlapped with the back in her impression. "Brother." The girl happily waved to the boy. The young man also waved his hand and walked into the stone formation in 3 or 2 steps. A few miles away, a group of desert dogs gnawing on corpses suddenly had a red light in their eyes. Throw down the body that had been gnawed on halfway and rush towards the stone formation at full speed. The girl sat on a stone root with her hands raised above her head to shade the sun. The young man saw this and took off his vest, revealing his robust body. He lifted the vest over her head to shade the sun. The two looked at each other and smiled. "Xianer, should I call them home now?" The girl shook her head and said, "Let's rest a little longer, and didn't Wang Jianyi say there's a treasure here? Brother, why don't you also dig and see?" The boy laughed heartily as he looked at the bumpy ground in the stone formation, and the girl also covered her mouth and chuckled softly. Suddenly, the boy stopped laughing and stood up to walk in front of the girl. "Xianer, could you try climbing onto the stone? I feel something's wrong." The girl turned around and climbed onto the stone upon hearing the words, with the sounds of children playing around. Moment several desert dogs blocked the entrance of the stone formation and kept pressing inside step by step. The boy saw this scene and hurried to urge the girl to climb up quickly, and called for the child above to come and guide her. But the girl seemed to be a bit anxious and accidentally stepped on it, falling off. The desert dog grinned as it saw the situation, forming a circle and pushing towards the young man. Looking at the teeth of the desert dog with dark red marks, the young man's face darkened. He glanced at his sister who had fallen down and took a hard step forward. Scared the desert dog back a few steps, but soon it continued to slowly approach forward. "Wang Jianyi. Hurry up and take the other few people from the other side of the stone to run back and call for someone." "What will you do then?" "I'll try my best to hold on until you come back." Wang Jianyi looked down at the young man with tense muscles all over his body and the girl behind him, and then at the approaching desert dog. He gritted his teeth and jumped down from the other side with a few children, rushing back to the village. The young man didn't care about Wu Zhengyi's decision, he didn't dare. He knew deeply that if he showed any flaws, these wild dogs would tear his sister behind him to pieces. So he is unwilling and cannot take a step back. Instead, he rushed forward step by step against the pressure of the desert dog. The young man rushed forward in 3 or 2 steps, swung his fist the size of a sandbag, and slammed it heavily on the face of a desert dog that was charging up and biting, and flew it out with a single punch. Then he bent down again to dodge a pounce, grabbed the tail of the desert dog with his back hand, and threw it towards the desert dog rushing towards the right. The collision of the heads of the 2 dogs and their screams only intensified the ferocity of other desert dogs. A few desert dogs rushed towards the young man with their mouths wide open. As soon as the young man wanted to dodge, he saw his sister huddled behind him with her head in her arms. I had to grit my teeth and turn around, punching and rushing towards it. Just a face-to-face encounter, the young man has several extra blood holes on his body. Blood slowly dripped from the wound onto the sand, and the desert dog looked up and howled excitedly for its contribution. The young man tore open his vest and wrapped it around his 2 forearms, and the trickle of blood quickly dyed the vest red. The young man recalled the combat posture taught by the school teacher, took a deep breath, and put on a posture. Mago stopped howling and bared his teeth when he saw the situation, facing the young man. Both sides were deadlocked suddenly, a gust of wind blew into the stone formation from outside. The boy and the desert dog charged together by chance. Bang! The boy punched the dog's head backwards, but more desert dogs rushed forward. The boy's open and close movements are to protect his younger sister behind him, but the desert dog doesn't care if you start gnawing at the weak defense areas. The young man gritted his teeth and endured the pain, tearing off a desert dog from his body. He grabbed his hind leg and threw it fiercely towards the surrounding rocks. At the same time, he kicked away a desert dog that was about to bite his thigh, and the other hand could not idle to clench its fist and use the back of its hand to fly away a desert dog that was biting from the side. Ah! The boy heard his younger sister shouting behind him and quickly turned his head. He saw a desert dog circling behind him at some point, about to pounce on his sister. Damn it, you dare! The young man was burning with anger, and with a swift step, he grabbed the neck of the desert dog and punched it to the stone. The corpse of the desert dog, whose head was flattened by a punch, slowly fell down, and the boy's fist was still stained with the fur and blood of the desert dog. Such a ferocious appearance cannot make the desert dog group feel any fear, but instead they howl even more excitedly. The blood in my eyes is even more intense. The boy didn't even look at his unconscious right arm and grabbed the falling dog corpse as a weapon to continue charging towards the desert dog pack. Afraid of missing another young man from the past, this time he took on all the attacks from the desert dog and instantly turned into a blood man. The young man, who had suffered such a serious injury, seemed to be fine. He went to Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com and still threw his dog corpse at the desert dog group. Gradually, the corpse of the dog was torn apart, but the group of desert dogs were also in disarray. But the young man knew that if he relaxed his mind here, when the rescue came later, he could only see 2 corpses. Glancing at my sister, who was honestly huddled in the corner behind me, I took a deep breath to relieve the pain in my lower body. After a brief moment of contemplation, I rushed forward again. Ah! Die for me! The young man roared and grabbed a desert dog that jumped up and wanted to bite his face. He grabbed its mouth with both hands, and its sharp teeth instantly pierced through his palm. But the boy didn't seem to feel any pain, instead he let out a roar and grabbed the desert dog that wanted to close his mouth. In an instant, a mist of blood exploded in front of the young man, and he actually tore open a desert dog. The girl was shocked as she covered her mouth and looked at the bloody figure in front of her. He and the figure in her memory gradually disappeared. The young man roared and grabbed a desert dog, directly breaking its spine from its neck, and then punched another desert dog into the sand without a sound. The remaining 2 desert dogs looked at the bloody man in front of them, and then at the tragic corpses of several of their kind on the ground. They quickly ran limping with their tails between their legs. The boy still couldn't let go of these 2 and chased them out, but they walked back in a few seconds. Leaning against the stone at the entrance of the stone formation, he slowly fell down and sat down. There. The boy heard someone shouting and stood up forcefully, calling for the girl to come over. Blood covered his throat, making it impossible for him to speak normally. "Xianer, it's okay to cough, brother is here." Wu Xianer looked at the blood figure in front of her, who was seriously injured but still pretended to be okay and gestured to her. The figures in her eyes gradually overlapped, and tears filled her eyes. Stupid brother. Chapter 3. Immortal Journey. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. The boy opened his eyes and saw the familiar ceiling of a medical clinic in the village. "How many times have you come in here to lie down?" The boy scratched his head and slowly got up from the bed. "Xiao Wu, you have really made a name for yourself this time. Your friends are about to squeeze out a small place for me these days." The young man turned around and looked at the middle-aged man sitting on the side recording something. "Mr. Li, please don't mock me. I can't even remember how many times I've been to your clinic." "Huh, the first few times you kids were just playing around, but this time it's very dangerous," Mr. Li said with a serious expression. 13 penetrating injuries on your body, 6 broken ribs, and bones in both hands almost shattered into pieces. Thanks to your great fortune, when you were about to die, a fairy passed by and saved your life. Immortal. That's... The young man looked at Mr. Li in confusion. "It's just a cultivator." "Oh, I forgot to tell you these things, and I thought I would never use them again." Mr. Li opened the cabinet next to him while speaking, and took out a dusty book from it. "Isn't that what I don't want to say at all?" the boy murmured as he took the book. "The Chronicles of the Town and Desert." The young man looked at the middle-aged man who had taught him for 5 years and was somewhat thin, puzzled. Mr. Li sighed and said, "Back then, when I was about your age, I thought I could easily cultivate and become a cultivator, carefree and joyful in the world." Mr. Li stood up and looked out the window, recalling the past. "But I don't have any talent for cultivation at all." The middle-aged man smiled bitterly. "At that time, the cultivator from the Zhenhua temple came to our town to look for children of the appropriate age to take in apprenticeship. More than 400 children in the town were selected, and when I thought I could also be selected, they didn't even look at me and passed by. Later, my parents even offered a lot of money to ask the cultivator to take me with them, maybe we could practice together." Mr. Li looked up and raised his hand to block his eyes. His voice trembled as he said to the young man, "Do you know what that monk said to my parents?" The young man shook his head and said, he said, "You can't even light this kind of waste wood thrown into the stove in your family." The boy looked at the sad man in front of him and didn't know what to say. "Sorry, your happy day has made you feel bad." Mr. Li quietly wiped away the tears from the corners of his eyes. No, it's not a big deal. I'm not even happy to hear you talk about the past, sir. Only by treating me as a friend can I say these things." "Oh, then you recognize me as a forgetful friend." Mr. Li rubbed the young man's head and joked. "By the way, Mr. Li," the young man pointed to the book in his hand and asked, "What is cultivator?" "Exactly." Looking at the young man's confusion in his eyes, Mr. Li cleared his throat and opened the records of the town and desert. The so-called cultivator is a person who uses their internal strength through cultivation. Looking at the boy's even more puzzled gaze, Mr. Li pointed at the book he had let go of speechlessly and said, "Read a book." The young man responded repeatedly, following Mr. Li's finger to look. The so-called cultivator is a person who uses absorption and extraction of spiritual energy as power. Unlike ordinary people who obtain energy through eating, they absorb the ubiquitous spiritual energy in the world as food. By absorbing and refining spiritual energy, cultivators can obtain extraordinary power. The boys silently read the words in the book. The age of a person has stages, and the cultivation level of a cultivator also has stages, which are refining body, emotionally driven to quarrel, open pulse, building foundations, immediate involution, jiran. After reaching the state of alchemy, cultivators can refine all their cultivation into a golden pill. As long as the golden pill is not destroyed, cultivators will be invincible. As the saying goes, if a golden pill is swallowed into the stomach, my life is up to me, not to heaven. After reaching the level of alchemy, one can fly in the air and gain hundreds of years of lifespan. Among them, those with extraordinary talents have the opportunity to awaken their own unique golden pill divine power. The young man looked at the introduction in the book with sparkling eyes and began to eagerly anticipate his path of cultivation. Mr. Li saw the young man feeling a bit ethereal, so he closed his book and lightly tapped his head. Do you know how difficult it is to practice? It's not like you can become a Jindan cultivator from heaven and earth just by listening to me in school every day. So how can one become a cultivator of the golden elixir? The boy looked curiously at Mr. Li. Firstly, you need to test your talents. Is there a possibility of embarking on the path of cultivation? However, you no longer need it. After all, there are immortals who protect you. Mr. Li ignored the big question mark on the boy's face and continued speaking according to his own words. Then you need to temper your body so that you can absorb spiritual energy. Mr. Li paused, but you don't have to worry about this. When the Immortal saved you, he also helped you wash your fa sway's pulse. What good luck! The young man turned his head awkwardly, but immediately turned around to listen attentively to Mr. Li's speech. In this way, you don't need to practice in the stage of refining your body. You can directly enter the stage of combining qi and try to absorb spiritual energy. Mr. Li turned around and walked out of the room, gesturing for the boy to follow. The boy quickly got out of bed and followed Mr. Li out. Look around and tell me what you see. The young man looked around in confusion, not looking at anything except for the lush courtyard wall. A faint blue gas drifted past the young man's eyes, and he instinctively reached out to grab it, then grabbed onto loneliness. Mr. Li looked at the young man's behavior with indescribable pain in his eyes, but soon changed his mind and became a good teacher who could not become a monk. Mr. Li, is this spiritual energy? That's right, this is spiritual energy. As long as the body cultivation is complete, the physical body will automatically connect with the world to perceive the existence of spiritual energy. The young man seemed to suddenly think of something and turned around to look at Mr. Li. Mr. Li suddenly understood his meaning. You've thought too much. Achieving a perfect body cultivation state is something that even ordinary people can do. As long as the body cultivation state is complete, you can perceive spiritual energy and practice. So why? The young man is puzzled. Because I don't have a Tao meridian. Mr. Li sighed up to the sky. Without a Tao meridian, it means that the spiritual energy in your body is just a passing guest, and it cannot be left behind to filter and transform into personal use. Mr. Li looked at the young man eagerly and said, and you? You have already discovered the Tao pulse under the Immortal's detection. And it seems to be quite small. Is that right? Where is the Tao pulse? How did I not find it? The young man lowered his head and touched himself, his comical appearance almost making Mr. Li laugh out loud. Fool, I just asked you to read. You read in your dog's stomach. Before the words could be finished, the rhubarb crouching in the corner of the courtyard shouted over. Mr. Li summoned the rhubarb and sat at the stone table in the courtyard with the young man, continuing to speak. The Tao meridian is an elusive thing that probably exists in everyone's spine. Although theoretically everyone has a Tao meridian, most human meridians are so small that they cannot be seen at all. Mr. Li spread his hand and said, what is the need for cultivation in a Tao meridian that is even smaller than a strand of spiritual energy? My Tao pulse. The young man looked at Mr. Li with some concern. Don't worry, you can be liked by that kind of person. Your Dao pulse is not only a newborn dragon, but also a towering python. The young man let go of his hanging heart and went to the book garden www.zhaozuiyuan.com, then continued to listen to Mr. Li's lecture. So, if you want to embark on the path of cultivation, finding your own path is also very important. The young man was about to open his mouth and ask a question when he was stopped by Mr. Li. Unlike lucky people like you, most people cannot directly locate their path. They have to rely on some treasures or their own efforts to discover it. And this is another threshold. It's just not enough to have a Tao meridian that can be practiced. The cultivator also needs to absorb spiritual energy to refine their own blood gas and find the Tao meridian in the spine. And this is what the Heqi realm needs to do. Countless people are stuck in the step of opening their meridians, and they will never be able to find their own Tao meridian in their lifetime. Even in death, it is only the Heqi realm. However, even if you haven't found the Tao meridian, it will slowly help you absorb spiritual energy. It's just that others absorb a wisp every few days, and you can only absorb one wisp in a few years. Apart from improving your lifespan a bit, it's useless. The young man nodded, and Mr. Li took out a jade box from his pocket as he spoke. That Immortal left you a pill that can release some spiritual energy in your body to open your meridians. Otherwise, with our sparse spiritual energy here, you might not be able to open your meridians in this lifetime. The young man quickly took the jade box and was about to open it to see what the elixir looked like when he was held down by a large hand that was about to move. Don't worry, this pill will be used when the first ray of morning light shines on the earth tomorrow morning. At that time, there can be a few more strands of spiritual energy here. The young man tightly hugged the jade box and nodded, while Mr. Li turned around and waved his hand to drive people away. Hurry up and go back. You've been unconscious for 5 days. What? I've been sleeping for 5 days. The young man quickly ran back home. Mr. Li looked down at the anxious boy and smiled, then returned to his room to continue his studies. Chapter 4. Ability. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, shoo. A gust of wind blew through the village, and the villagers who had just finished lunch chatting at the doorstep of each courtyard passed by before they could see what was happening. They heard the familiar voice of the young man shouting, "Borrow, borrow. Old Wang will enjoy a peaceful and prosperous life in the future. Isn't that right? His grandson is fine even if he's injured like that. Look, look. He runs faster than that sand rabbit." Moreover, the village chief's family even compensated their family for an old yellow ox. In the future, this field doesn't need to be touched by oneself, just watch the ox work. And, I also heard that. Auntie looked around and covered her face with her backhand, whispering quietly, the actual voice was loud, that grandson of old Wang has been spotted by a fairy. There are really immortals. Several aunties approached the aunt who had just whispered and took out a small handful of melon seeds and poured them into her hand. Auntie picked up the melon seeds and talked vividly while eating them. You don't know, wow. My son also went to save people that day. Oh my goodness, old Wang's grandson has become a bloody person. It's several times more blood than the blood splattered from son's house when she slaughtered pigs before. Auntie pointed at her body as she spoke, this, and this, that are all sandbags and big blood holes. The blood is flowing like heavy rain. Can you even survive with such a big hole? A grandma exclaimed and gestured on herself. Hey, do you think it's a fairy? My son was about to collect the body of that child with everyone, and we saw a fairy wearing a white robe descending from the sky, raising his hand and shining a light on old Wang's grandson. Aunt opened a melon seed and chewed it in her mouth. Don't eat, speak quickly. Several aunties urged her to speak quickly. Auntie had to eat several melon seeds at once, flipping her lips and spitting out the seeds to continue talking. In the blink of an eye, in the blink of an eye. What can you do in the blink of an eye? I have to fart for a while. That's already a bloody person. In the blink of an eye, it's all good, clean. Those sandbag-sized blood holes on his body are all gone. Even the little vest he's wearing is sewn up. It's even newer than new. Oh my God, this fairy is too amazing. If my son can become a fairy, then I won't have to farm for the rest of my life. The mother who was eating melon seeds looked down upon and mocked the daydreaming mother. What are you all about? If my son were a fairy, my family could still live in this dirt yard. It would have turned into a brickyard for the village head's family long ago. That daughter-in-law is not someone who easily finds a bunch of big breasts and buttocks to raise. Look at your ambition. The young man left the corner of the intersection speechlessly, almost dying once. After being rescued by the Immortal, his physical fitness improved in all aspects. Listening to those aunties chatting from afar is like shouting in his head. I thought I could get some useful information, but then I heard Auntie Bragg imagine the yellow ox in the village head's house soaring higher and higher amidst the chattering of several aunties, its forehooves flapping wildly, and its mouth moaning loudly. Laughing uncontrollably. Several aunts heard the laughter coming from the intersection and were still roast about whose child was hysterical. Old man. I'm back. The young man kicked open the courtyard door, but unexpectedly, his strength increased several times and he kicked the door away with one foot. It smashed fiercely on the roof of the neighboring house. Old man, listen to me explain that I didn't mean to do it. The young man was already planning to be beaten hard, but he didn't expect that what landed on him was not the old man's dark fist, but a slightly thin and weak embrace. The young man looked at the old man who was holding him for a moment, and then realized that he was also holding on to the old man. Old man, I'm fine. The Immortal saved me. Look. The young man untied his vest and revealed his lean chest. Look. There's nothing wrong. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. The old man trembled and touched the young man's face, feeling both familiar and unfamiliar. It was then that the old man believed he was not dreaming. Your sister is waiting for you inside the house. The young man rushed into the room upon hearing the words and happened to bump into the girl head-on. Brother. Are you okay? Wu Zhengyi rubbed around the boy, afraid of touching any scars. I can't believe your brother, can I still not believe immortals? Your brother and I are physically strong now. We can run faster than cows and horses, so there's nothing we can do. Wu Zhengyi nodded repeatedly, holding on to the young man's arm and not letting go. Zhengyi, come on. Your brother just came out of the clinic and his body is not much better. Be careful not to strangle his arm. No way. My brother is invincible in the world. Grandpa, can you fight that group of dogs alone? The young man felt a bit embarrassed and rubbed his head. Zhengyi, go grab an old hen and stew a chicken soup for your brother to supplement. Upon hearing this, the girl released her tightly held hand and went to grab the old hen. The old man really doesn't need it. I ate from Mr. Li's side. The young man waved his hand repeatedly to refuse. I can't bear to stew if you don't eat it. This is a compensation gift from the village chief. If you don't eat it, he will still give it. Upon hearing this, the young man no longer refused. After all, he had only had chicken soup once before, and it was when the village chief got married and held a flowing banquet not long after. Wu Zhengyi caught the old hen. Carrying the chicken wings, he slipped into the house. Master. I caught it back. What should I do? The old man is picking rice and vegetables. Without looking back, he shouted. Call your brother to kill the chicken and then go to Aunt Zhang's place to get a white radish. Wu Zhengyi nodded and handed the chicken to the boy, then ran away bouncing and jumping. The young man took the chicken and walked to the corner of the courtyard. With one hand, he pressed down on the chicken head, and with the other hand, he picked up a kitchen knife and stabbed his neck. The old hen immediately began to pounce, and chicken blood flowed out from her neck. But soon the boy realized something was wrong. The chicken blood didn't drip down but flew up. Enter the body along the wrist. The young man threw away the chicken and silently looked at the chicken blood still flying towards his wrist. What's wrong? The old man looked through the door curtain at the young man standing in the courtyard in a daze. It's not a big deal. This chicken is flapping so badly. Then be careful. The old man said and continued to prepare. The boy returned to the corner of the yard and picked up the chicken. The old hen, which had just been full and plump, had already turned into a dry corpse. A slight increase in hand movements turned into fly ash and dissipated. The young man remained silent, remembering that Mr. Li had not yet taught him how to look inside. At this moment, a sudden sound came from the brain. Old hen, quantity 1. The boy was startled and then jumped onto the courtyard wall to look around. Make sure no one is talking nearby and then jumping down, looking at the sound echoing in the chicken coop and feeling lost in thought. Is Xian'er's chicken soup delicious? The young man looked gently at Wu Xian'er. Wu Xian'er's 2 hands and the chicken leg were gnawing on her oily mouth, humming. It's so fragrant, I haven't eaten anything so fragrant before. The old man looked at the warm scene before him, with sand in his eyes. Little brother. Your children, I have not let down your hope. What's wrong, old man? Eating meat. The old man waved his hand. No, nothing, nothing. The hot air has smoked my eyes. At night the young man explained to the old man that he had something else to do with Mr. Li and would go home later. The old man waved his hand and urged him to go and return quickly. After calming his sister, he left the yard in just a few steps. The young man lied, he didn't want to find Mr. Li, but went straight to the Gobi Desert. He had only run for a dozen minutes to reach the destination, which used to be several miles away. Standing in the desert, he sensed the surrounding movement for a moment and then rushed in one direction. Woo woo. A few desert dogs were nibbling around a sand rabbit, and the boy lay quietly behind a sand dune in the distance, watching the group of desert dogs. Not long after, a sand rabbit was completely devoured, leaving only 2 strong hind legs, but the desert dogs were not full and were still hungry. The 2 desert dogs picked up the rabbit legs and ran in one direction. The boy saw the action of the desert dog quietly following behind. Before long, a few desert dogs took the boy to a nearby cave. And there were already many desert dogs gathering around, holding food in their mouths. They seemed to be waiting for something together at the entrance of the cave. The young man stared intently at the cave and saw a desert dog the size of a domestic pig emerge from it. Is this the boss of Mago? No wonder he can be arrogant in this place. The young man silently compared the power gap between one person and one dog in his heart. Ahem. The massive desert dog dynasty let out a howl and then lowered its head to enjoy the food brought back by other desert dogs. Other desert dogs did not fill their stomachs, and some even just licked a few bites of meat before delivering the food. But they dare not take food from the mouth of this desert dog king, and the bones at the entrance are the best deterrent. Suddenly, the desert dog king stopped eating and looked up around. A desert dog thought it could eat ahead and dive into a pile of meat, but was still in the air when it was slapped by the desert dog king's paw and its head shattered on the ground. Ahem ahem. The strange howling of the desert dog king puzzled the young man, but he immediately realized that he had discovered himself. Then he didn't hide anymore and kicked the small sand dunes away. The raised dust covered the faces of the desert dogs, but it was only sand that had no effect on them. Instead, it could block the enemy's line of sight and make them better at sneaking attacks. But tonight is different from the past, the young man has returned several times stronger. Holding a bone-cutting knife secretly obediently from the butcher in hand, charging along with the rising dust. Desert dogs can sense enemies in the sand, and even teenagers can. Under the influence of their unique abilities, one desert dog after another turned into clusters of blood gas in the sand and dust that covered the sky and sun. The young man found the target and slashed it with one blow. The blood gas dissipated, but then condensed into a liquid that flowed into the boy's body. Feeling the increase in power brought by the blood entering the body, the young man raised his mouth and instantly cut out 5 swords. The blood of the 5 regiments turned into a stream and flowed into the boy's body, and his strength continued to grow. In an instant, sand and dust fell. The Desert Dog King looked cautiously at the direction where the sand and dust fell. Surprisingly, there was only a young man left. Not even a dog corpse was left behind. The Desert Dog King let out a low growl, and the remaining desert dogs heard the sound and rushed forward, shouting loudly. The young man simply raised his hand and fell, several desert dogs turning into flying ash. Desert Dog King takes advantage of the gap between the youth's attack to launch an attack. Flying up with a claw, he was blocked by a young man's knife and retreated a few meters to find the Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. The Desert Dog King roared and called for other desert dogs to charge. Well done. The young man took a deep breath as he faced dozens of desert dogs attacking from all directions, his eyes shining with blood. In just an instant, the desert dog flew backwards at the same time. Some have already turned into fly ash while still in the air. The young man was still immersed in his own time, and everything in the world slowed down. The young man just swung his sword, stabbed and slashed, and in the next moment, all the desert dogs were defeated. Either it turns into fly ash or it has no power to stand up anymore. Just at this moment, the Desert Dog King rushed out of the blind spot in the young man's sight, opening his bloody mouth to devour the despicable human in front of him. But the next second it abruptly stopped charging. Because that human didn't know when he had already run over his head. The jumping dust had not yet risen, and the young man had already swung his sword and chopped it off. The Desert Dog King narrowly escaped this blow, but also had one ear cut off. It no longer roars, but silently looks at the young people who have slaughtered its tribe in front of it. One person and one dog paced slowly in the sand dunes, and no one dared to reveal their flaws first. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept up sand and dust in the air. It's moving. It fell down. The Desert Dog King never understood why he collapsed in front of this human just after suffering a small injury, even to the death. He looked up at the human standing in front of him, revealing his neck. The young man fell silent, then swung a knife that ended his life. As the Desert Dog King turned into flying ash, a sound and a pattern appeared in the boy's mind. Desert Dog King, Quantity 1, a painting of the Desert Dog King standing in the sandstorm with only his dark eyes exposed. Chapter 5. Past. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, a crescent moon hangs high in the night sky. A black shadow kept flashing through the village and finally stopped at the entrance of the butcher's yard. The young man saw no one around and lightly jumped over the yellow earth courtyard wall. After landing lightly, he tiptoed towards the butcher's kitchen. Stop. With a loud shout, the young man jumped a few meters high and jumped directly onto the roof. A sturdy figure walked into the moonlight from the darkness, and the boy breathed a sigh of relief upon closer inspection. Then he gently jumped down and stood obediently in front of the sturdy man like a little quail. Uncle too didn't sleep. The young man lowered his head and muttered, still casting a few indifferent glances at the man. How dare I sleep if I lose my pig-killing knife? The man's unique loud and roaring young man seemed to be swaying like a candle in the wind. Oh, you always do things before they are done. Tell me, what did you do with my knife? The man hugged his arm and asked as he looked down at the boy who was planning to play with his clothes. The boy was about to answer when he was stopped by a man. The man sniffed at the young man and quickly concluded that his pig-killing knife had been taken away by him. Did you go find those sand dogs? The young man's face was full of question marks and his mouth grew up, saying, How did you know? I don't have any blood on my body either. The man snorted coldly. The smell of dog poop on you is much more pronounced than the smell of blood. If the dog king didn't have his brain kicked by a donkey and invited you to his cave for dinner, then you would have gone and killed those dogs yourself. The young man was shocked and took out a pig-killing knife wrapped in cloth from his arms, returning it to the man. Can you tell with just a sniff? The man first untied his cloth bag and took out a pig-killing knife to study and inspect under the moonlight, confirming that there was no damage before giving the young man a good face. I've been living here for 30 years, killing more dogs than you've ever eaten. As I spoke, I untied my clothes and revealed the head-sized scar on my abdomen. Back then, I was just like you. When those dogs were unhappy, I went to the singles competition alone. At that time, I was just like you, at the peak of the cultivation realm. I thought I was invincible around this village. I also had confidence in going to the singles competition. The man sat on the steps and looked up at the moon. At that time, I met a younger brother in the village, and he would practice martial arts with me whenever he had nothing to do. After hesitating for a moment, the man decided to say this, he is an orphan, I don't know where he comes from. When everyone discovered him, he was stealing corn in the field. At that time, the weather was dry and the villagers had a bad harvest. That kid stole about 10 pieces of corn. My father led the village to look for his relatives to teach that kid a lesson. I searched door several times, but no one knew this child. I only found out when I asked Mr. Li. The man looked at the stars in the sky, and the Milky Way echoed in his eyes. This kid turned out to have escaped. That year, the world changed greatly. Not only did we suffer from drought here, but even several large oases in the desert disappeared. It made the people miserable and the beasts had no food to eat. So, a beast disaster attacked the desert city. You've seen that dog king's prowess before, haven't you? Not to mention that he can accurately recognize things when the dust is sweeping, his ability to trigger dust storms is truly terrifying. The young man was somewhat puzzled, and when he recalled, it was indeed after a gust of wind that the desert dog king took action. Can this also be considered a sandstorm? The man looked a bit puzzled when he saw the young man, but he didn't think much before continuing to talk about himself. But one of the monsters attacking the desert city is the dog king. But he is more than 100 times stronger than him. In just the blink of an eye, a huge sandstorm tornado that seems to connect heaven and earth is attacking the desert city. Do you know how big that is? We can all see a yellow line connecting heaven and earth in the distance in the village. You know, our village is hundreds of miles away from the desert city. The man seemed to recall something sad and suddenly fell silent, wiping away the twinkling stars from the corners of his eyes with his broad palm. That child escaped from this terror. His parents buried them all in the dog's mouth to cover his escape. He was just 10 years old and suffered from this at a carefree age. The man suppressed the pain and covered his eyes, while the young man beside him didn't know what to do and could only watch the rough man silently shed tears. Afterwards, I begged my father to adopt this child. My father also softened his heart and after a few days of hard work, he agreed. Everyone in the village probably remembers that year when my father borrowed food everywhere for our 2 children. Coincidentally, during the drought, everyone didn't have much surplus food, so how could he give more alms to my family? So my dad knelt and begged from door to door. Not much, just half a corn cob. In order to exchange for some food, my dad worked as a cow and horse for others, doing all the dirty, hardest, and tiring work. Just to feed our brothers. The man was pounding with grief and anger, his clenched fist bursting with veins. However, I am. But I killed my younger brother for a moment of showing off. The man knelt down in pain, the boy had never seen a man who always treated everyone with a gentle smile and cried like this. The man breathed a sigh of relief and climbed up from the ground to sit back on the steps. Watching the young man's concerned gaze, he continued speaking. At the end of the year of drought, the prolonged drought finally awaits people to come and rescue. Those are the cultivators from the desert hall, who have received a mission to assist us, the group of suffering people on the edge of the desert. A cultivator is a cultivator. The magical skills of a skilled craftsman directly bring back the dry channels to flow. And I was also guided by one of them to break through the realm of Fa Sui Jing. I could even start taking in energy. At that time, I was extremely confident that I could also become a cultivator and protect one side like them. The man's expression turned desolate again. Until that happened. Because there were several nearby villages that needed assistance, the monks rested overnight in our village. And in order to show off, I took my younger brother to go find the Dog King. At that time, as soon as I broke through my strength and surged, an inexplicable confidence surged in my heart. I remembered that my younger brother's home and parents were destroyed because of that group of dogs, and my blood surged. I wanted to take my younger brother to kill that group of dogs to cheer everyone up. After all, those dogs have also made us hate and afraid for a long time, and I have been struggling because no one in the village can beat that Dog King without any movement. So I quietly ran out of the village with my younger brothers to find the Dog King. At that time, the Dog King was very rampant, and his nest was a few miles away from the village. During the drought, he would occasionally come over to catch a sheep or catch someone to eat. I was holding a big knife in my hand and took my younger brother to find the Dog King. When I found him, he was gnawing on a sheep's head and didn't even glance at us when we arrived. He called out to a group of dogs to come up and kill us. That group of dogs is not my enemy of unity. They were chopped up in a few strokes. Before I could show off anything to my younger brother, the Dog King suddenly attacked. I pushed my younger brother away and blocked the dog's paw with a backhand crossbar. The Dog King saw my strong strength and couldn't escape with just one strike. The man suddenly paused, his lips trembling as if the next words were as powerful as ever, making him stuck in his throat and unable to speak. A gust of wind suddenly blew by. I was still immersed in the matter of hitting and repelling the Dog King, but before I could recover, I saw yellow sand pouring into the sky in an instant. I realized something was wrong but didn't have time to retreat. Just then, the Dog King suddenly rushed out of the sand behind me. I raised my knife to block the attack, but it was still one step late. Just as I closed my eyes and waited for my death, I realized that I had nothing to do. The Dog King and the dust in the sky disappeared from the book garden www.zhaoshuyuan.com, leaving only my younger brother lying on the ground with a big hole in his back. I trembled as I knelt down and looked at my younger brother lying in a pool of blood in disbelief. My brother gently touched my face and said, "Brother, thank you and my dad for taking me in for so long. Don't put on a sad face. I just miss my mom. Don't look at the big hole on my body, but it doesn't hurt at all. Brother, don't be sad, I just went to see my mom and dad." The man drooped his head in desolation. In no time, a few cultivators who were helping us arrived. They tried their best to save me, who was kneeling in a pool of blood and crying. But it was very uncomfortable, and they couldn't save him either. He was too young, and that damn bastard smashed almost all of his internal organs with another blow. It was already their best effort to hold on until a few cultivators arrived, just to see my father's last glance. The man's fist clenched and loosened, clenched and loosened. But in the end, he released his hand and lay on the ground, his eyes filled with infinite regret. Later, the cultivator went to find the Dog King, but it was very cunning. He abandoned all his ethnic groups and fled far into the depths of the desert. After chasing for hundreds of miles, he still couldn't find a trace and had to give up. My father has been bedridden since that day, and I'm sorry they ran out alone. But when I finally buried my father, I didn't even come back. The man spoke out with all his strength, and the young man silently stepped forward to help him up. Uncle Tu, I have avenged you. The desert dog king has already been taken over by me, and the body has been thrown to the vulture. The man's eyes regained some radiance, and a big hand lightly patted the young man's shoulder. Thank you. The man stood up and sent the young man to the discharge door. When the young man looked back, his body, which had been hunched all day, seemed to straighten slightly. Chapter 6. Farewell. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. The boy walked on the yellow road under the moonlight. Recalling the mournful expression of the butcher, he was exposing his own scars to educate the youth. The young man walked silently, imagining how he would have died without that peculiar blood, and no one knew. The boy raised his right hand and looked at the hand emitting a faint red light under the moonlight, clenching his fist. He will definitely protect the people he cares about. At all costs. The young man walked inexplicably to the door of the school. Mr. Li teaches here on weekdays and he also lives here. Looking at the faint light shining through the window in the room, the young man pondered for a moment and decided to knock on the door to enter. Come on in. Mr. Li's voice rang out from the room, and the young man was taken aback before gently pushing the door in. I saw Mr. Li wearing a dark green nightgown, sitting sideways by the bed, reading a book by the candlelight on the nearby desk. Looking up, I saw the young man enter and pushed the glasses that were resting on the bridge of my nose with my index finger. Why don't you go back to sleep at this point? What are you doing outside? Seeing the young man looking at his glasses in confusion, he smiled slightly. The little thing I'm wearing was invented by a monk. It was originally created for practicing pupil techniques. Later, it was developed for other uses, just like mine. It can slightly concentrate the surrounding light in the area where my gaze is directed. This way, when reading at night, I'm not afraid of not having enough light to see clearly. The young man took his glasses in surprise and learned to wear them on the bridge of his nose like Mr. Li. In an instant, the rest of the place dimmed a bit, but the place he was staring at lit up. Remove the glasses and restore them to their original state. The boy returned his glasses to Mr. Li. Mr. Li took his glasses and placed them on the desk. He looked at the young man and asked, "Did you go out alone?" The boy hesitated for a moment and nodded. Mr. Li stood up and took out a book from the nearby bookshelf to hand over to the young man, which was the record of the town's desert scenery. Take a good look at this book, and prepare to pack up and set off in the next few days. Are you leaving so soon? You also know that only the cultivator Jidan can fly in the sky. And the one who saved you that day was the one who tore open the void. Otherwise, why would I call him a fairy? The young man's mouth grew up in shock. Why do everyone say that it flew over? Ordinary people can't even see spiritual energy, where can they find someone tearing apart the void? In their eyes, it's like a person suddenly appearing in the air and coming down to save you. Mr. Li patted the young man's shoulder heavily with one hand. This is your immortal path to success. With such a strong person covering you, isn't it that birds can fly in the sky and fish can leap in the sea? Can't you leave a good impression on them? Oh, I got it. The young man nodded fiercely and then turned around to leave under Mr. Li's signal of waving his hand to drive people away. Just as I was about to step out of the house, I suddenly remembered that I had something to say before and turned to ask, Mr. Li, you said you wanted to give me a good name before. When are we going to do this? Mr. Li was momentarily taken aback, then remembered something. Wearing glasses, bowing his head and waving his hand, he urged the young man to leave quickly. I will let you know when you leave. The young man agreed and happily went back. 2 days later. The young man was packing his bags in the room, while his reluctant sister held on to the corner of his clothes. Brother, can we not leave? Can you spend more time with others? Faced with his younger sister's spoiled behavior, the young man had no choice. I can only lower my head and silently tidy up my things, fearing that if I look up, I won't be able to leave. Xianxia. Come here. Don't provoke your brother, he's a big deal. We can't delay him. The old man walked in from the door and called out to the girl. The girl reluctantly loosened the corner of the boy's clothes, and the old man walked up to him. Mr. Li is waiting for you at the school. After saying this, he took the girl and drove the cow away. After packing up his clothes and dry rations, the young man picked up the small purse containing desert coins and carried his backpack to find Mr. Li. Before long, the boy arrived at the school gate. Mr. Li had already stood outside the door waiting for his arrival. Long wait, Mr. Li. Mr. Li looked at his attire and shook his head, gesturing for him to come in. Then he turned around and walked into the school to the backyard. The boy followed Mr. Li to the backyard and found that Butcher Wang was also present. Say hello and look at Mr. Li. Old Wang is really good. Even if he travels far away, he doesn't know how to get a nice piece of clothing for his child. The young man was about to refuse when he saw Mr. Li take out a navy blue shorthand. The young man has never seen such a good thing before, he immediately takes it and plays with it. The young man hesitated as he gently stroked the cold and slippery texture on top. I'm sorry to accept such a gift, but I'm a bit reluctant to return it. Take it. Mr. Li made this garment specifically for you from the day the fairy saved you. The dull voice of the butcher rang out, and the boy looked at Mr. Li. Mr. Li smiled and asked him to enter the inner room to change, and the young man happily went in to change clothes. After a while, the young man changed his clothes and came out. The navy blue short fight, combined with the young man's handsome and resolute face, was a perfect match. Not bad, I knew it was suitable for you. Mr. Li applauded and praised, saying that the young man was embarrassed. Lowering his head and touching his head, he returned to his usual simple appearance. The butcher approached and patted the embarrassed boy, handing him a small pocket. The boy opened it in confusion and found several money tickets inside. The young man just wanted to return it, but the butcher had already run away without a trace. Mr. Li laughed and cursed. This pig slayer is not very good at speaking. He usually chats well, and when it comes to this kind of time, he can't even hold his fart. Then he reached out and pushed the boy back into his pocket. You keep it, look for Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. He is grateful for helping you avenge him. You can use this money as a reward for defeating demons and demons. Remember to save some money. The boy had to take his pocket. There is a layer inside the clothes, so it's safer to put it there. The boy listened to Mr. Li's instructions and put 2 packages of money into the inner compartment. Then I watched as Mr. Li was about to open his mouth when he called him into the front room. Xiao Wu, come over here. The young man had to follow Mr. Li and swallow his doubts first. Mr. Li took him to the main house and pointed to a piece of text on the table, saying, "How about this name?" The boy followed Mr. Li's finger and saw 3 big characters dancing on the rice paper. Wu Zhengyi. Xiao Wu, I hope you can walk on the right path without being biased. That's why I gave you this name. What do you think? Mr. Li, it's quite good. At first glance, it's average, but upon closer reading, it still has a bit of charm. Mr. Li laughed and said, "Ha ha ha, good. You truly are the student I value the most. You understand how to be a teacher, and I have already arranged a donkey cart for you to go to the desert city. It will be at the door in a moment. Don't you go and say goodbye to the family members." Wu Zhengyi shook his head and said, "The old man took Xianxia to the field. I have already told them." Mr. Li nodded and then asked him to sit down and rest, waiting for the donkey cart to arrive. After a stick of incense, a middle-aged man pulled a donkey cart filled with goods to greet Mr. Li at the entrance of the school. Mr. Li. Mr. Li nodded at the middle-aged man and then turned his head to look at Wu Zhengyi beside him. After taking 2 steps forward, Wu Zhengyi turned around and bowed to Mr. Li, who waved his hand to let him go quickly. Wu Zhengyi got on the donkey cart and embarked on the road to the desert city. Chapter 7. Roads. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Wu Zhengyi leaned against the goods and hid under the shade provided by the bamboo hat, gazing at the sky. Listening to the creaking sound of the donkey cart walking on the dirt road, he couldn't contain himself. Then he got up and looked at the middle-aged man riding on the donkey in front of him. "Uncle, how long will it take us to get to the place? This donkey cart is walking too slowly, isn't it?" The middle-aged man didn't turn his head and drove the donkey forward. "Young man, don't worry, this road is not easy to walk on. We'll be on the main road soon." Upon hearing this, Wu Zhengyi had no choice but to give up and find other ways to pass the time and ease his somewhat excited mood. Wu Zhengyi opened several books brought to him by Mr. Li and looked at them with boredom. Suddenly remembering that he had learned the inner vision method from Mr. Li, he eagerly sat down and prepared to give it a try. Firstly, use the perception enhanced by the cultivation environment to search for the surrounding spiritual energy. But the spiritual energy here is too thin, and Wu Zhengyi searched for a long time before pulling a ray of spiritual energy. Subsequently, Wu Zhengyi slowly pulled his spiritual energy from the dantian into his body. Suddenly, the blood and gas in his body surged, and Wu Zhengyi immediately closed his eyes and looked inside to see the blurred interior of his body caused by the blood and gas surge. "I thought I could see it so clearly. It made me waste half a day preparing." Wu Zhengyi muttered a sentence and then sat down seriously to start refining qi. Dong! 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 Listening to the strong beating of his heart, Wu Zhengyi began to put his body into a state of full operation, generating a large amount of blood to refine that strand of spiritual energy. Wu Zhengyi carefully controlled the blood flow to slowly envelop the spiritual energy, hoping to use it to penetrate and refine the spiritual energy. However, if cultivation were so simple, people would not worship those powerful cultivators so much. I saw that wisp of spiritual energy still wandering in its body without caring about the package of a large amount of blood gas. It seemed that for it, Wu Zhengyi's body was no different from the outside world. But as the blood gas enveloped the area, the wisp of spiritual energy began to notice something was wrong. Following closely behind was intense resistance. Cough cough. Wu Zhengyi's internal blood was greatly disrupted by the stirring of spiritual energy, and the surge of blood caused him to cough up blood. Is it so difficult to refine spiritual energy? I feel like even fighting that desert dog king doesn't have to endure so much. Wu Zhengyi took out a handkerchief to wipe off the blood stains on the corners of his mouth, folded it up and put it in his pocket, then cleared a spot on the cart and sat it down. Humph. Just a wisp of spiritual energy is missing me, Wu Zhengyi. As the young man closed his eyes and turned his gaze back into his body, his blood and energy had been disrupted by the struggle of spiritual energy. This time, the boy took this wisp of spiritual energy seriously, and the spiritual energy slowly lost its vitality in the boy's sitting position. No wonder I had to memorize that cultivation posture by rote. It turns out it really worked. The boy thought to himself as he condensed his blood into needle-like shapes, and then wrapped a large amount of blood around the periphery to slowly approach the spiritual energy. That wisp of spiritual energy is still stagnant in place, as if it has been pulled by something. And the encirclement of blood has already arrived. After gently enveloping the spiritual energy, the blood needle hidden behind the soft blood encirclement has been released. Just for a moment. All the blood needles pierced the spiritual energy at the same time. The spiritual energy was instantly awakened and struggled desperately. Countless blood needles were destroyed, and the boy let out a muffled groan. Vigorously stimulate the heart to produce blood gas and condense it into blood, needling towards spiritual energy. At this moment, a strange blood-colored ability that had been dormant in the body for a long time suddenly appeared. Wrapped around the boy's heart. When the young man was shocked, he found that the blood gas produced by the heart wrapped in a blood-colored ability could turn into old hens one by one. With the continuous appearance of the old hen, it unexpectedly converged into a huge and incomparable chicken. That spiritual energy is like a constantly wriggling worm in front of the old hen. The old hen glanced at the wisp of spiritual energy with the eyes of a bug, and then pecked it away with a swish. The spiritual energy was actually swallowed by the old hen like a worm. The young man watched in shock as the spiritual energy that had fallen into the belly of the old hen was pecked, bitten, and torn open by a large group of small old hens inside. His mouth was so big that it could fit into a honey melon. After only about half a pillar of incense, the wisp of spiritual energy was completely consumed and digested by the old hen. While the old hen digested it thoroughly, it also disintegrated into a normal blood gas appearance, and some of its blood gas even had some spiritual energy like that. Wu Zhengyi opened his eyes and withdrew from his inner vision, feeling somewhat confused as he took out the cultivation experience that Mr. Li had given him. There are records of some qi cultivation methods of cultivators in the harmony qi realm, and there is also Mr. Li's annotation. After a large number of experiments and the cultivation methods I collected during my previous travels, the most secure method is to condense blood gas into needle-like needles and then slowly extract spiritual energy. Remember. Be sure to sit upright. Only in this way can we achieve twice the result with half the effort. Otherwise, there will be something you can handle. The book in his hand was flipped around with a gust of wind, and Wu Zhengyi reached out to hold on to the bamboo hat that almost flew away. An indescribable expression surged on his face. What's wrong, young man? Are you feeling uncomfortable sitting? I'll find you a cushion to sit on. The middle-aged man continued to speak without looking back, causing Wu Zhengyi to think that he also had eyes on the back of his head, carefully searching for them. No, uncle. It's just a sudden thought of something. Oh, that's fine. You'll just have to endure for a while, and it'll be comfortable to switch to a carriage when you arrive at the terminal. Okay, thank you, uncle. Thank you, we were supposed to change the carriage. After chatting nonsense with the middle-aged man, Wu Zhengyi pulled another strand of spiritual energy into his body. This time, Wu Zhengyi covered his heart with a special ability in advance to produce special old hen blood gas, and directly ate that spiritual energy into his stomach. But unlike the imagined easy cultivation of spiritual energy, the wisp of spiritual energy from zhaozuiyuan.com only stayed in the old hen's body for a while before rushing out of her buttocks. Continue to wander within Wu Zhengyi's body. Wu Zhengyi began to think about which link went wrong, recalling the previous steps. First, wrap the blood gas and then use the blood gas to coagulate and puncture the spiritual energy. Wu Zhengyi opened his eyes and clenched his fist. By the way. That's it. I didn't use my blood to consume spiritual energy first, that's why I was trapped by spiritual energy and ran away. Wu Zhengyi thought to himself. Mr. Li still remembers something. At the same time, Mr. Li, who was teaching at the school, suddenly sneezed. Did that stinky kid speak ill of me again? Mr. Li rubbed his nose and continued teaching the children. This time, the refining of spiritual energy went much smoother. First, it was consumed with a blood gas needle, and then it was used to create a special ability to make an old hen swallow and digest it, successfully refining a strand of spiritual energy again. With the refinement of the second wisp of spiritual energy, Wu Zhengyi's body suddenly underwent a change. I saw a phantom of the ocean appearing at Dantian. At the same time as the virtual shadow appeared, Wu Zhengyi's blood and gas levels in his body suddenly increased. Full of internal organs. Wu Zhengyi opened his eyes and suddenly felt a surge of energy. He lowered his head and clenched his fists, feeling the constant burst of strength in his body. With just one punch, there was a burst of air-breaking sound. Startled the middle-aged man driving ahead. What's the young man doing? There's so much commotion. It scared me. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist practicing until I was happy. The middle-aged man reluctantly accepted this explanation, but kept muttering to himself. Is this cultivation correct? How do you feel like the child made a mistake in fixing it after fooling the middle-aged man? Wu Zhengyi sat upright on the cart and calmed down a bit of excitement before continuing to cultivate spiritual energy. Chapter 8. Yincheng. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, young man. We're here. The middle-aged driver gently awakened Wu Zhengyi, who was practicing. Wu Zhengyi opened his eyes and found himself under the shed of a post station. Next to them are several middle-aged uncles unloading goods, and a few carriages are parked at the door slightly away. Wu Zhengyi got up and got off the cart, stretched lazily to move his muscles, and then planned to help the uncle unload the goods together. The uncle quickly put down the burlap bag in his hand and stopped him when he saw that he was coming over. Oh, young man, don't do this anymore. Come in and rest inside the house. The donkey cart is bumpy all the way, go inside and have a tea break. Let's do this rough work. Hey. What's up with this? Don't think I'm a valuable person just because I came out of school. I've been a skilled worker in the fields since I was young. There's nothing wrong with such a small matter. Uncle couldn't resist Wu Zhengyi's words, and seeing his sincere gaze, he hesitated for a moment before agreeing to let him help with the work. Wu Zhengyi leaned in and immediately rolled up his sleeves to help carry the goods onto the carriage. With his help, several donkey carts had less than a pillar of incense stacked and placed on the carriage. After several uncles finished counting the goods, they took Wu Zhengyi inside to drink tea and chat together. After a stick of incense, Wu Zhengyi sat on the last carriage with several middle-aged uncles. Uncle, why don't we each have one car? We all have to squeeze into this one car. Faced with the boy's simple question, the uncle was a bit unsure how to answer. Harmful. What's so embarrassing about this? But it's just those who live in the city and look down on us in the countryside. Wu Zhengyi scratched his head in confusion. But aren't the things they eat what we grow? What's wrong with you? People look down on you. Dare to sit with them, now you have nothing to do. When you enter the city and buy and sell things, you'll know what a troublemaker is. Wu Zhengyi remained silent. Just as he was about to get out of the car and seek an explanation, he was stopped by the uncle who had been accompanying him all along. The child doesn't need it anymore. I know you're doing it for us. But you really don't need it anymore. There was a hint of helplessness in the uncle's voice, but the hand holding the young man's arm did not exert too much force. Perhaps his heart also hoped to be treated equally, but he did not have the ability to do so. The young man froze in place, thinking that everyone was so kind and amiable as a family, just as he had just come out of a small village in the countryside. But the faces of several uncles in front of him clearly told him that the world is not so beautiful. Wu Zhengyi gently released his uncle's hand and stepped out of the carriage. Don't worry, uncle. I won't be rough, after all, I came out of school too. Wu Zhengyi turned around and smiled, then strode towards the several carriages ahead with his head held high. Wu Zhengyi knocked on the door of the second carriage, and the door was pushed open. What caught the eye were several people dressed similarly to the uncles. A few people looked at Wu Zhengyi, who was dressed in Tibetan blue shorts, and respectfully asked him. What's up, little brother? Wu Zhengyi glanced at the empty carriage and felt a little angry at the way the uncles and goods were crowded together. He was about to teach them a lesson, but then he remembered what Mr. Li had taught him and refrained from taking action. How many of you guys occupy such a large carriage? The few people in the car immediately understood what the young man was up to when they heard Wu Zhengyi speak like this. What you're saying, little brother? It's not good for us to only occupy such a large carriage. So let's make room for you to rest. Upon hearing the flattering voices of several people, a slight black line appeared on the boy's head. You're mistaken. What I mean is, since you still have a lot of space in such a large carriage, why don't you give the people behind some seats to sit together? The impatience in the eyes of a person inside the car suddenly increased upon hearing these words. Little brother, you don't understand. Those rural areas. Before he could finish speaking, his companion beside him covered his mouth. Just as he was about to glare at his companion, he leaned in and whispered something before wilting. An elderly man stood up and arched his hand at Wu Zhengyi, who also bowed back, since the young brothers said that, let them sit together. Upon hearing the man's answer, Wu Zhengyi got off the carriage with satisfaction and went to the back carriage to call for someone. After the young man left, the person who was covered in his mouth quietly asked the man next to him, is that really a cultivator? He's too young, isn't he? His companions and grandfather watched him silently. How many times did I tell you to be careful? You didn't notice what the little brother was wearing. That's Ling Jian, a shop in the Silver City that specializes in making clothes for cultivators. Ah! How did you see this? Stupid. Their clothing store will use spiritual thread to mark the corners of the clothes with patterns. In dim environments, it will slightly light up. And that young man's clothes will light up everywhere as soon as he comes in. It's not enough to tell the story, is it? After being scolded by his companions, this person remained honest in the corner. Not long after, Wu Zhengyi and several uncles walked from the carriage filled with goods to the front of this carriage. Seeing several uncles hesitating and hesitant to get on the car, the young man pulled up a few people to get on. A few uncles were about to apologize to the people in the carriage when they saw them greeting them without any discrimination against rural people. Seeing this scene and the smiling face of the young man, several uncles no longer refused to find a place to sit in the car, but a few people still crowded together and dared not occupy too much space. Wu Zhengyi didn't know what to say when he saw this, so he could only sit quietly away to give them enough space. As the carriage advanced, the frozen atmosphere inside the carriage eased slightly. The crowd divided into 3 groups and sat quietly chatting. Wu Zhengyi, who was sitting in the middle, sat cross-legged on the soft cushion provided by the group of people, pulling the spiritual energy to refine, and focused on practicing, forgetting the passage of time. After an unknown amount of time, the boy woke up under the slow stop of the carriage. After taking a deep breath and looking out the window, I unexpectedly saw a sea. Wu Zhengyi's mouth widened in surprise, unable to believe the scene before him. The old man sitting next to Wu Zhengyi smiled in surprise and came up to him to clarify his confusion. Encountering a large lake on a lush slope is quite rare, isn't it? Wu Zhengyi turned around humbly to seek advice from this old man upon hearing the sound. The master saw that although this son was a cultivator, his character was quite good, so he spoke up and said, "Do you know how this lake came about?" Wu Zhengyi shook his head and the old man lightly stroked his beard, looking out at the lake and saying, "You should have heard of the animal disaster more than 20 years ago. That disaster not only shattered half of the Silver City, but also dug out a big pit several miles around it. What does this have to do with that lake?" Looking at Wu Zhengyi's question mark on his face, the old man immediately dispelled his confusion and said, "Because a great expert has arrived." He raised his hand and repaired the heavily damaged Silver City. He also expanded a lot. In an instant, he brought several oases from deep in the desert. Pour the water into the big pit, and plants and trees are planted in the city and by the city's edge. Then he created a large formation and engraved it on the earth to ensure the safety of the Silver City forever. The old man seemed to recall some past events and said, "I wonder if you had the luck to see Silver City shining brightly." Wu Zhengyi had some doubts in his heart but did not interrupt the master's speech. "Oh, it's time to take the boat." "Take a boat." Wu Zhengyi leaned out of the carriage and looked around, only to see a towering building ship parked at the port dock. "This lake is much bigger than you imagine." The old man walked out of the carriage with a smile, onto the dock, and into the building boat. A few people followed closely and also boarded the building boat, while the uncles drove the horses onto the other side of the dock from the carriage behind. "Uncle, what are you going to do?" Let's unload the goods." You go up first. We'll go up later. Wu Zhengyi wanted to go over and help, but was blocked by his uncles and asked him to rest on the boat first, which helped them a lot. Unable to do anything, Wu Zhengyi had to turn to the other side and board the ship. After putting down a few coins for the ticket seller, he took a ticket and found a seat by the boat to sit down. Looking at the shimmering lake outside, Wu Zhengyi suddenly had a name in his heart. It's like the starry sky at night, right? Wu Zhengyi turned around at the sound and found that the old man was sitting right behind him. He nodded. The old man also looked outside the ship and said, "This is the name of this lake, Xinghai." Wu Zhengyi also turned outside the boat and looked at the lake, nodding slightly to acknowledge the name. Zhaoshuyuan.com. After a while, the building ship slowly set sail. As the building boat set sail, Wu Zhengyi withdrew his focus from his cultivation and planned to take a good look at the beautiful scenery on the lake. Suddenly, he felt something was wrong. "Grandpa, is there such green on this lake?" "Where is there green?" "Young man, you're looking at me, right?" Wu Zhengyi only then realized that the lingering aura on the lake was actually a large cluster of spiritual energy. Immediately, he withdrew his focus from the scenery and sat down in his seat to practice. Sure enough, it used to take half a day on the carriage to wait for a wisp of spiritual energy to float and pull over, but now it's like a whole person wandering in the sea of spiritual energy. Wu Zhengyi quickly pulled several strands of spiritual energy into his body for refinement. I don't know how long I've been practicing, but Wu Zhengyi was quietly awakened by someone. "Young man, you're lucky today. I saw her blooming on my first visit to Yincheng." Wu Zhengyi was about to ask a question when he was pushed to the bow of the boat by the old man. "I saw a towering city standing tall in the lake ahead." The towering building ship was like a chick in front of her. As the sun slowly sets behind, endless light shines on the giant city. Starlight shines in the surrounding lake water, and the pale blue stone walls are gradually shining brightly. In the next moment, endless spiritual energy will burst out. Ordinary people can't see or touch spiritual energy, yet they briefly possess physical entities. Burst towards the surroundings of the giant city. The whistling spiritual energy blew his clothes with a crackling sound. Is this Yincheng? Looking at the huge city shining with silver light in front of him, Wu Zhengyi opened his mouth again. "Young man, haven't you seen it before? This is Silver City." The young man now knows why the people of Yincheng look down upon those outside the city so much. If he had grown up in such a magnificent city, he would have looked down on the people outside to some extent. Chapter 9. Strange. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. As the building ship docked, the glory of the towering city gradually dissipated. After the last sunset, the silver city returned to its usual light blue color. But as the sunset sets, the starry sea in the lake begins to shine brightly. This city gate is so high. It feels like at least 10 cows are standing up so high. Wu Zhengyi looked up at the tall and steady city gate and couldn't help but sigh. But surprisingly, there are no guards here to guard the door. Wu Zhengyi recalled the stories he had read in the storybook about how big cities were guarded by soldiers with doubts in mind. Wu Zhengyi slowly stepped into the city. Drip. Hechi realm. Wow, something suddenly rings. Wu Zhengyi was startled by the sudden sound and almost ran into a fat man walking arrogantly next to him. "Hello. You don't have long eyes when you walk, do you?" The fat man was about to curse when he saw Wu Zhengyi's voice, which was slightly glowing in the dimly lit passage of the city gate, getting quieter and quieter. He wished he could go back a few seconds and slap himself. "Ah, I'm sorry. It's my problem." Wu Zhengyi apologized to the fat man while speaking, which scared him to kneel down and beg for his forgiveness. Just as Wu Zhengyi was about to lift the trembling fat man lying on the ground, a slightly mechanical sound suddenly echoed in his mind. "Youth in Hechi, please go to the certification office of Liangpi Lane to verify the identity of the friar. Liangpi Lane. What strange name. After gently lifting the fat man, Wu Zhengyi walked out of the 20-meter-long city gate passage in just a few steps. Where is Liangpi Lane? Where can I find it in such a big place? Wu Zhengyi scratched his head speechlessly, looking at the spacious road that allowed 10 cows to walk side by side without even a glance, and his head was very big. So he reached out and grabbed the chubby guy who had just walked out. Brother, how can I get to Liangpi Lane? The fat man finally managed to avoid the great deity and waited for a while before coming out, only to be caught just in time. The result is the following scene. The fat man knelt down on the ground with a thud and kowtowed repeatedly, "Big brother, big hero, big immortal. I really understand my mistake. Please don't mind letting me go, okay? I have a 120-year-old mother above me and a 13-year-old sister below me. The whole family relies on me to support them, big brother. Do you want money, big hero? I can give you all the money on me," he said, getting up and struggling to tear open the clothes that barely wrapped around him. He took out a wallet that seemed to be steaming hot from inside. "Big immortal, I have all the money on me here. Please have a lot of money on me, okay?" The speed of the fat man's movements and speech was so fast that even the cultivator in the chi state couldn't react. The words and actions of the two were almost simultaneously finished, and then they said, "Ah," at the same time. After a very boring conversation, the fat man finally dared to stand up and speak. Wu Zhengyi looked at the absurdly chubby man, and even if his movements were a little wrong, he had already knelt on the ground and was about to kowtow to pay. "I have started to doubt whether people in big cities are like this, Liangpi Lane. You have to go to Yangzazai Street first, then turn right for 800 meters, then turn left to Guki Road, then walk 600 meters, then turn right for 300 meters. It's a little far. What kind of road names are these?" Wu Zhengyi murmured silently in his heart, "Li Songliang, please show me the way." During the exchange just now, Wu Zhengyi learned about the fat man's name, which was just as strange as others. Li Songliang was about to refuse when he saw Wu Zhengyi clenching his fist and bulging his veins. As soon as it reached his mouth, he swallowed it and almost choked on him. Wu Zhengyi's concern for him was seen as a threat from a powerful cultivator to a weak commoner. It's easy to have someone lead the way. Wu Zhengyi walked and looked at the scenery along the way, completely ignoring Li Songliang who was trembling like walking on thin ice ahead. The shout emanating from him had already dyed his clothes 1 degree deep. "My wife, Wu Daxian. We have arrived at Liangpi Lane. Can I go now?" Li Songliang looks at Wu Zhengyi standing in a daze at the entrance of Liangpi Lane, and asks softly with trembling legs. Ah. Oh, you go, you go." Wu Zhengyi suddenly remembered that there was a freshly steamed meatball next to him, which was so cool in the city. Li Songliang felt relieved, and as soon as he turned around and took a step, he passed out in a daze. "Hello. Brother Li, are you okay?" Before falling into a coma, Li Songliang heard these words as if he had seen his kind and gentle mother waving at him. Wu Zhengyi looked at Li Songliang lying on the ground, and just didn't know what to do when 2 armored soldiers came out of Liangpi Lane, one carrying Li Songliang who had fainted with one hand, and said to Wu Zhengyi, "Young man, new here. Just go straight 50 meters and there's a sign that says Master Verification Office. Just open the door and enter." Then he left Liangpi Lane with Li Songliang. Wu Zhengyi gets the destination but still stands still looking over Liangpi Lane. Other passers-by thought it was a patient from a certain hospital who had run out as they watched Wu Zhengyi stand still and daydream. Only Wu Zhengyi himself knew why he stood still. Because he saw a live skyhawk. Wu Zhengyi swallowed his saliva and the legendary creature lay quietly on top of the Silver City. If you look closely, you can even see the saliva hanging from the corner of her mouth. Wu Zhengyi worked hard to calm his mood and thought about what terrifying creatures were afraid of. But the result was none. Because this thing went extinct countless thousands of years ago. The reason for its extinction is simple. They have eaten up the sky. A sky falcon will eat 170 yuan from birth to death. Although this number is not large, and the world will self-repair. But I can't hold on to this bird. There are too many things. The sky was completely devoured by the sky-hunting eagle, which was worth 1 yuan. Endless extraterrestrial stones lost the obstruction of the sky and crazily fell to the ground, directly destroying 80% of the entire world. So this kind of biophysics naturally went extinct. And the creatures that can only be glimpsed from ancient books are now crouching and sleeping soundly above the Silver City. How can this not make people feel terrifying? Wu Zhengyi felt like he was already trembling in front of this skyhawk and had no spare time to move. Now he told him to walk 50 meters to the bottom of this bird's mouth. I won't go even if I kill him. After a stick of incense, the two soldiers carrying the fat man came back and saw Wu Zhengyi still standing at the entrance of the alley, so they pushed him into Liangpi Alley. Why are you still in a daze here? Let General Sicom wait for how long? Wu Zhengyi turned his head stiffly and said, can't you see that? Which one? Oh, Miss Haidong. She is the spirit guarding our Silver City. She is very cute. If you have the chance, you can go see her. Wu Zhengyi was speechless, so he had to follow the two soldiers and take a few steps to explore. Only when he found that the eagle was still drooling and sleeping did he dare to walk confidently. As soon as she arrived at the sign indicating the cultivator verification office, Miss Haidong made a move. Startled, Wu Zhengyi ran 50 meters in 2 seconds, unleashing a speed far beyond the qi cultivation period in the qi state. The result was that Miss Haidong just flipped over while sleeping. Stepping into this room, Wu Zhengyi didn't know how reassuring he was. Although the blue bricks and tiles might not even be able to stop the hunting eagle in the blink of an eye, he was still incredibly reassuring. Where did it come from? Wu Zhengyi followed the clear and pleasant voice and saw a woman with long hair fluttering behind the desk in front of him. Slowly shift your gaze downwards, not towards the man. But it does look good, from Wuxia village. Wu Zhengyi was startled by the clear and sharp voice from just thinking about other states of human nature in front of him, but it also plunged him into deeper thinking. Well, the address is Wuxia village, male, age. I'm 16. Wu Zhengyi interrupted the unknown gender recorder's self-talk, causing the other person's eyebrows to furrow and his heart to feel uneasy. Forget it, I think you're a first-time offender and I'll let you go. I'm 16 years old, my name is Wu Zhengyi, and my cultivation is at the peak of qi cultivation in the qi state. Suddenly, I stopped recording and looked up at the young man who was still thinking about gender issues. My brain is not very good. Wu Zhengyi waited for the recorder to finish recording before asking. May I ask how you learned about my cultivation and name? Looking at Wu Zhengyi, who almost raised his hand when asking a question, the beauty didn't hold back a smile. Wu Zhengyi was almost stunned when he saw it, and his inner balance had tilted towards one end. First of all, you heard a voice when you entered the city, right? The boy nodded. That's the effect of guarding the city's main formation, in order to prevent identity recognition by foreign tribes from infiltrating. Are there any other races infiltrating? Wu Zhengyi asked in confusion. Of course, if it weren't for the infiltration of foreign tribes. How could they have broken through the city defense formation 27 years ago? Only then did Wu Zhengyi clarify the truth of the past. My name. The beauty recorder tapped on the desk with her fingers and popped out a glass board. In the boy's even more puzzled state, she tapped on it a few times and showed it to him. This is the Heidonghai East Chronicle system, created based on the Guardian City formation. Everything within the radiation range of Yincheng will be detected by Haidong and recorded here. These are your own information, don't slide or tap, you can only see these. Wu Zhengyi handed the glass board back to the clerk's hand. I see, then You said that dog king. It's also in the record, and you still have a reward that hasn't been claimed. It's about clearing out that dog king. Wu Zhengyi looked at the indifferent tone of the person in front of him and felt a bit displeased. That was the king of the desert dog. A powerful creature that almost won a life and death battle with him. Oh, it's just a little wild dog. Wu Zhengyi quickly covered his mouth as if he had been seen through his underwear, and then thought for a moment to cover underneath. You kid, if you have any intention, I'll make you laugh, right? The instantly powerful spiritual pressure collided with Wu Zhengyi, causing him to slide backwards towards the wall. He just realized that the recorder was countless times stronger than him. After thinking for a moment, Wu Zhengyi decided to kneel down and apologize to the recorder like that chubby Li. When he apologized, he was lifted by a spiritual power hand and stood up. Looking at the clerk in front of him, covered in black lines and speechless, Wu Zhengyi could only scratch his head and pretend to be foolish. While he scratched his head and pretended to be foolish, the recorder had already changed his evaluation of him in the Hai Dong 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 Chronicle. There must be a problem with his brain. Bang! Wu Zhengyi was lifted out of the door by his spiritual power, and then slammed the door fiercely. Wu Zhengyi thought to himself that this was terrible. He had just come to save a beautiful woman with both strength and power. Zhaozhuyuan.com. The soldier who was watching at the door was crying. When he came out, he leaned over and asked. How about it? Have you registered all the information yet? You're lucky today, General Sikong personally recorded it for you. If it were just a small matter, a regular recorder could ask you 1,000 or 800 times not to repeat the sample. What? That's General Sikong. Isn't that a woman? Wu Zhengyi looked at the two soldiers in shock. That's right. That's General Sikong. We are still his personal guards. So. Is General Sikong male or female? Of course he's a man, so handsome. I don't know how many girls in the city beg him not to. Wu Zhengyi recalled the clerk's icy skin and jade bones, bright eyes and white teeth, and willow leaf eyebrows. It didn't look like a man at all. After looking at the two soldiers, he thought to himself and shook his head with the look of the recorder. You two must be lying to me. That's clearly a beautiful woman, okay. The two soldiers were speechless and said, people who see the general for the first time feel this way, but you are the first person who dares to stand at the door and shout so loudly. Wu Zhengyi hurriedly turned back to find that no one was standing behind him and sighed with relief. Then he followed the two soldiers to the entrance of Liangpi Alley. By the way, there's something I forgot to say. One of the soldiers turned around and shouted to Wu Zhengyi after seeing him off. General Sikong is a presence that transcends the Jidan realm. Before the young man could react, the two of them quickly ran back to stand guard. Leave Wu Zhengyi stranded in a dilemma at the alley entrance. Inside the cultivator's verification office, General Sikong looked at the image projected from the glass panel in front of him. A young man confronting the Desert Dog King, who suddenly collapsed before launching an attack. How many rounds do you have to defeat the peak of the Heqi realm in the Fa Sui realm? Interestingly, then let me see who is behind you. Chapter 10. Wonderful and Strange in. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, Wu Zhengyi fled Liangpi Alley in confusion. I hope I won't be held in grudges by such strong people. Wu Zhengyi was walking on the hot pot road with some annoyance, while looking for a place to stay. Oh, there's an inn here. But this name. Coriander Tower. Wu Zhengyi was a little speechless and then pushed the door open and walked in. As soon as you enter the door, what catches your eye is a patch of green tables, chairs, walls, and floors. Several diners sat scattered at the table, eating various green foods. 2 cups of cilantro juice. The waiter's loud voice echoed in the building, and as the sound fell, 2 diners waved their hands. It's better to change to another store. Wu Zhengyi was about to turn around and leave the world of coriander when he saw the waiter who had delivered the coriander juice blocking him with lightning speed. Haha, this little brother. Can you taste the food in our store before leaving? Ah. It's free for you to eat, so please taste it before leaving. After saying that, he bowed. This. Wu Zhengyi looked at the expectant waiter in his eyes, unable to say anything if he refused, so he had to agree to give him a try first. Boss. We have new guests for dinner. As the waiter's voice came out from the kitchen, there was a girl who looked very energetic. Oh. Xiao Jin did a good job. Now we have another diner. After Wu Zhengyi was greeted by the waiter and sat down, he went to the kitchen to follow the spirited girl to work. Little brother, you had some good luck today. I didn't see that when Chef Chen's creativity diverged, the dishes were quite normal. Wu Zhengyi looked at the lush green table next door and said in silence, is this also considered normal? However, although the food here is somewhat unique, the housing is considered to be among the best in the northern city. The person next door didn't pay any attention to Wu Zhengyi's words and quickly finished eating before going upstairs. There are many strange people in big cities. This young man from the countryside has decided not to have too much contact with others when he needs to go to the city again next time. Before he could wait for long, the waiter came up with a plate of food. Please use bibo dangyang, coriander juice, green fat and red lean, coriander sausages mixed with noodles, and futsue ludan, coriander cake with strawberry embellishments. Wu Zhengyi looked at this plate of dishes with various combinations of coriander. It seems like they look pretty good. Wu Zhengyi picked up a glass filled with cilantro juice and looked at it. This shop has put a lot of effort into it. Such beautiful glass cups are used by customers. Ah, customer, you're talking about cups. It's like this. Our boss's sister is a pretty impressive cultivator. She discovered a natural piece of glass so many of the utensils in our store are made of glass products. The waiter was very proud when he said this. Well, I don't dislike coriander. Occasionally, when we have dinner with Mr. Li, we often have. Wu Zhengyi took a sip while thinking. This taste. The fragrance of coriander is slightly sour, and upon closer inspection, it has a slightly sweet aftertaste. Wu Zhengyi looked at the waiter. This is very good. Thank you for your recognition. The waiter bowed deeply to Wu Zhengyi, although I used a little too much cilantro. Is this a bit too much? Wu Zhengyi roasted in his heart. However, our boss has a high talent for cooking. Sorry to bother you, please have a meal. The waiter quickly retreated into the kitchen. Wu Zhengyi looked at the staple food on the table. Coriander sausages mixed with noodles. With the first impression of coriander juice, Wu Zhengyi also looked forward to this noodles. Take out 2 chopsticks from the nearby bucket, compare their length and thickness, then make a chopstick and suck it into your mouth, carefully tasting it. It feels like it's no different from ordinary mixed noodles, just a little more coriander flavor. Wu Zhengyi leaned back and thought, putting a piece of sausage in his mouth. It's so salty. It's a salty taste of braised meat. He quickly took a sip of coriander juice. Oh. This taste. The salty aroma of braised sausages is neutralized by the slight acidity of coriander juice, which actually stimulates the original meat aroma. Wu Zhengyi picked up a chopstick of noodles, sausages, and coriander and put it into his mouth. Sure enough, the taste we eat together is different. Compared to the sourness and sweetness of coriander juice, the taste of coriander in the noodles is a more peaceful and refreshing fragrance, giving braised sausages a different flavor. Boss. That guy eats very well. I don't even see who made it. The girl looked up proudly. Not long after, Wu Zhengyi finished this bowl of mixed noodles. While savoring the deliciousness in his mouth, he looked at the remaining dessert. Floating chui flowing pill. He had never tasted this new type of pastry before, only once in Mr. Li's oral narration. With the foundation of the first two dishes, Wu Zhengyi's expectations for the first dish have been raised significantly. Gently scoop up a spoonful with the provided green flat spoon and put it into his mouth. The cool and silky taste first hits Wu Zhengyi's taste buds, and then the fragrance of coriander rushes up and hits in a series. The soft, sticky and sweet cake, combined with the cool and silky things on top, bursts out with a different taste. The light sweetness washes away the salty aroma brought by the previous mixing of noodles, making his mouth even fresher. It's really delicious. Wu Zhengyi couldn't help but sigh. At this moment, the young girl boss walked out of the kitchen. How about it? Our store didn't disappoint you, did it? Indeed, I didn't really like your store at zhaoshuyuan.com. But these 3 dishes have changed my outlook. Hee, then you need to experience the housing in our store. That's also great. Okay. I wonder if there's still a room available. I happen to be staying temporarily for a few days too. The waiter took a few steps and leaned in front of Wu Zheng. Sir, this way, please. Wu Zhengyi followed the waiter up the stairs next to him to find a suitable room. By the way, is the guest a cultivator? The waiter looked at the keychain in his hand and asked Wu Zhengyi. Yes, what's wrong? Let me arrange a room with a cultivation room for you. The waiter respectfully handed over the key to Wu Zhengyi and then left. Hey! This room won't be too expensive, will it? After being stopped, the waiter turned around and smiled. How can we respond? Our boss allows anyone who can taste the delicious dishes she makes to stay in the restaurant for free. Ah, thank your boss for me then. The waiter bowed to indicate that he remembered and then left again. Wu Zhengyi walked towards his room door with the key in hand, inserted it, and lightly twisted it in. What you see directly after entering the door is not a patch of green, but a calm dark blue. Wu Zhengyi looked around the room and said, it's quite in line with the feeling of diligent cultivation. Then he opened a door facing the bed and said, oh, there's actually a dedicated practice place here. Wu Zhengyi couldn't wait to try out the feeling of cultivation in this place. As he sat cross-legged on the cattail, the swimming spiritual energy around him slowly approached him. Do you still have the effect of gathering spiritual energy? What a wonderful and unique inn.